Hello everyone, how you guys doing today? Good? Good. So I'm going to take you through a few stories as we kind of go on this adventure together. And I want to make this very interactive, excuse me, very interactive. So please, along the way, if you have questions, please don't hesitate. I'll walk around. I'll keep you kind of going. And I'll take you through a few of my lessons learned as I went through both Google and also at Tesla, how we built the HR and the recruiting function there and helped scale the organization. So again, lots of interaction. So basically, I'll divide up in two sections. I'll talk about just building people operations overall, and then all kind of words of wisdom around building a scrappy recruiting function. All right, so rules of people ops. So I got to Tesla in 2009, and the environment was pretty scrappy and pretty dire for the HR team. The HR team about 8 months ago was blown up. They started a new team, and that was not functioning well. They asked me to come in. I was lucky enough to get the gig, but let me just set the stage for what it was in 2009. So it was super scrappy, right? There was no frills. It was, I brought my own pencil and paper into the office because, office supplies were, was cash restricted. They actually told me once I started that we're not quite sure we're going to make payroll this month, right? So it was going from Google, where I was at sleep pods, and food was every 300 feet and I could fall into a pile of sushi. And then I come to this very scrappy environment. Now, for me, it's great because I love that, right? And it's going to, force me and the rest of the team to be very resourceful and scrappy in the way we think about things. But it was truly, truly a bootstrap startup, right? And for many years, that was, I guess, the important continuity of everybody that we hired at the beginning was understanding that you rely more on resourcefulness, right? Rely more on scrappiness than you do on spending big money, and you could do a lot of things. So I had some rules for people ops. Basically, I said, okay, I understood that they hated the people ops team, the HR team, for the last several years, and they blew it up a couple times. And so I came in with this philosophy, right? There's gonna be no fluff. We'll do no HR speak. I'll have a jar in the middle. Anybody who says like competency model or anything like that puts $1 in the jar because we don't talk about that stuff. And the key is blending approaches, and you'll find through the presentation today how important that from all these different disciplines. So it was so key for me to bring in so many different ideas and so many different people from different backgrounds into the HR team to create a really smart function that would really work closely with the executive team. And everybody had to basically step outside the job scope. Purely as a startup, I required all the HR folks, all the people out folks, to jump into other areas. And so everybody it was all hands on deck on many different issues, and so that was kind of how we structured the team. All right, so first, the key to focus. The function has to report into the CEO, right? I've talked to other areas and other companies, and it reports into the GC or reports into the CFO. It takes on a whole different perspective, right? It takes a whole different dynamic if the legal team is running HR or if your finance team is running HR. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work well. So I was lucky that both Elon and Larry at Google both believe that HR should report into the CEO, and that creates an open playing field. I mean, you need that perception and also the reality that HR is an equalized function for the rest of the organization. And if you want to attract really great HR players in the space, you have to have it an equal organization to the rest of the company. So the next thing is rethink the DNA of the people team. So basically, what I had to do is the secret sauce of a great people team. So I'll take you through this and a few stories along the way. So hire both HR and non-HR players. When at Google, for example, to create this amazing recruiting team at the very beginning, again, it was right after the IPO, and there was just a handful of recruiters, and they had to double in size every year at Google. I thought about creating a really special recruiting team. So I didn't get just straight HR professionals or lifelong recruiters. I brought in functional experts in that particular area to be the recruiting team. So for sales, I brought in sales professionals and I taught them how to recruit. For the legal team, I brought in paralegals and attorneys and I taught them how to recruit. For engineers, the same thing. So for every functional area, I put in functional experts to know what they're looking for, to know what they want to find. What does good look like, right? So I mix that together with professional HR and recruiting function folks, and that created a very powerful team. At Tesla, I did exactly the same thing when I started, right? I looked at the organization, I said, I'm going to bring in manufacturing people, I'm going to bring in investment bankers, I'm going to bring in the super smart people to be the HR function, and they're going to help build a really amazing, phenomenal organization that's going to take the company in a great direction. The adaptability of people is super important. Like a good story is, this is a very simple one, is that I had to help hire an HR professional for one of Elon's portfolio companies. And I brought in an individual who came from Google actually for a while. And the immediate thing is I tried to retrain him saying, all right, you need to think different than coming from Google and immediately taking your Google culture and applying it to this environment, because it's a totally different environment. So what happened is after 3 months, it wasn't quite the right fit because the person couldn't adapt really well to that functional area and to the company. And so I had to refine an individual to come in and really be able to function with a CEO that is just looking for a smart person to be able to adapt. The business and policy side, I don't know how many people have HR teams in their companies now, but the key thing is that, when I'm working with a startup currently, just helping them out. And when I came in to look at their HR team, their number one open rec was HR compliance specialist, right? And I just melted. I said, well, what is this role, HR compliance specialist? So immediately I dissolved that role. I said, no one in HR is going to do compliance. We'll have smart people that can help with all these different areas. But just the whole idea of an HR being compliance and policy should be squished out of existence, right? You need smart people who can make sure that we do the right thing for the company. There's a lot of government regulations and so forth that we need to get done. However, that's not the primary purpose of HR. Systemically and not myopically, always think about things for scale, right? Always build processes with scaling in mind. I've always pushed the HR team to be as prolific in every role that I've had, as prolific as the R&D organization, to come up with new innovative ways to build a process, to scale something, and blow things up. So I would always ask them, okay, this process might be good for now, but is it good for 2 years from now? If the company gets 5 times this size, will this process work? And they struggle. If you're struggling for it, then we have to rebuild this thing. So we're always building for scale. Two, I think, great stories here. I'm going to talk about transferable skill sets. So I mentioned before that I like to hire people from different disciplines. So there was one time, it was in 2010, I believe, and I got a call from Elon. And he said, all right, Arnnon, I'm having a problem. We need to double our sales output. We're 6 weeks away from the end of the quarter, and we're not going to hit our numbers that I promised the street that we would hit in terms of reservations and product lines. And so I need help. And I go, what do you want me to do? I want you to take over sales. Take over sales for the rest of the quarter and drive sales. And I said, no problem, no problem. So I brought all the sales team into a room, and I brought all of HR and recruiting into a room, and I said, for the next 2 months, we're going to be one team. This is how we're going to do it. Recruiters, you are super smart people. From this point forward, you're going to tell all candidates they're on hold, and you're going to learn how to sell products. And here's your scripts. By 5 o'clock, I'm putting you on the phones. Okay, so I handed out the scripts. I looked over to the benefit. I had a couple benefits folks and one comp person, and they're looking at me kind of shivering. And I said, okay, you guys are great with with paperwork and process, and I appreciate that. So from this point forward, for the next 2 months, you are on DMV registration across the United States. Figure out how to register cars, figure out how to get those things done, and you're going to triple the size of the team and go hog wild. All right, off they go. And then I looked at the employee relations folks, and I said, I have a very special job for you. You're good with people. I have a couple of employee relations folks on the team. You're good with people. So I'm going to give you all a list of everyone who had canceled their orders for some reason. They had something happen in their life. They decided to cancel an order. And you're going to call them, and you're going to counsel them back to mental health. You're going to talk to them. You're going to connect with them. You're going to figure out why they canceled the order, and you're going to bring them back into the fold. You're going to sell the products. You're going to make them believers again, and you're going to solve their emotional problems. Great. All right. So I gave them a full list, and off they went to the phones. And then I had the analytics team, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and they're looking at me. And I said, all right, analytics team, this is what we're going to do. We have Salesforce as a product, and it's helping with our lead generation. So you're gonna figure out a new algorithm to look at leads, to qualify leads, and you're going to just don't disregard what's been done in the past, and you're going to create a new algorithm, and you're going to help me. So noon and 5 o'clock every day, you're going to create a list, and you're going to give them to the recruiters and the salespeople to call. And the last group was a training group. I had a few trainers on the team, and I said, here's what job for you. You're going to relook at the entire sales process, and you're going to redesign it, and you're going to train all the trainers, and you have 2 days to do it. All right, so everybody started going. And the course of sales team's looking at me like I'm crazy, but I said, this is going to work. I feel it's going to work. So we put all the teams together, and it started to bear fruit, because I have these smart people on this team. Like the employee relations folks were bringing in new, like re-upping leads, millions of dollars were coming back in reservations. The recruiters were making great sales, and everyone was doing their part, and this whole ecosystem was working really well. So before I knew it, end of the quarter, we had surpassed the quota that we were supposed to get, and Elon gave me a call a week in and said, you are the best F&HR team in the history of humankind, right? So we just did it, and we kind of built a team that's so transferable that we can jump in, and there's hundreds of stories where we helped with production, we helped with automation, we help with manufacturing, and all different aspects, because the team is strengthened by its diversity. A resourceful mindset. I have one more story for you on this one, because I think it just shows, I'm trying to prove a point here and kind of start to get a context. So I was given a job to basically build a college recruiting function at Tesla. And when I asked the same question at Google, this is no joke, when I asked the same question at Google, I said, okay, I asked them, all right, I want to build college recruiting, kind of build it. How much money do I have to do that? And they said, well, why don't you start with $5 million and see what you can do with $5 million. This is at Google. I said, oh my God, this is awesome. And so I built a really great recruiting function for college. Then at Tesla, I asked the same question. They said, okay, you have $20,000 for the entire year and do not spend it all. Okay, great. All right, perfect. A little bit different context. So very scrappy. So what do we do? So I said, well, I was given an objective to get this thing done really fast. So basically what we did is, all right, how do we get connected with these schools and universities across the United States? So we identified 30 universities that we wanted to go after. And we identified all the professors that we wanted to make a relationship with. And we started walking around the office trying to figure out, now, how are we going to connect with these people and compete against like a Google and an Apple that just spends hundreds of thousands of dollars and gives checks to these schools to get their great students. So we're walking around the back office and into a little bit of the factory at the time. It was a small factory. And we saw on the racks, we saw these battery packs. So these battery packs were sitting there, and they were for testing. There were these testing battery packs. And they were used for a lot of experiments. And they're, as they age a little bit, then I asked, like, what do we do with them? Well, we recycle them. We send them out and get them recycled. So I said, okay, great. Can I take them? And what we're going to do is we're going to take these battery packs and we're going to send them to these universities that we identified. All the universities we identified have a vehicle program. Some solar vehicle program. They have, it's called Formula SAE. They do competitions. So we're going to send these battery packs out to these universities. And in addition to, we created little coupons on it. It's kind of hokey, but bear with me. We created little coupons that said you get one engineer for a competition to judge or to be a mentor or whatever you want to use this engineer for. We'll send that engineer out during the week, sometime in the next few months. So we packed all these things together, put the coupons in there, and sent it out to the universities. And within a week, we started getting letters and emails and notes from these professors thanking us for this great innovative way of getting to them. And also these battery packs can be used in their labs for testing for all their vehicles and all their components. So within 3 weeks after that, they started sending us their top candidates, and the whole program just blossomed. And sending students out plus the battery packs only cost us $19,500 for the year. So I hit under 20,000, pat on the back. So it was great. So secret sauce is just, again, creating this team that has all these characteristics to it. We're able to apply it throughout all the different initiatives that we need to get done. All right, so also a key thing I want to go over is analytics. So when I first started at Tesla, I said I'm only going to build two parts of the HR function, right? There's lots of different areas, employee relations. So I said we're going to stop for that. What we're going to do is we're going to focus on only two things. One is set up a recruiting function that's very powerful with amazing recruiters who can go out and help scale the company. And the second is we're going to create an HR analytics team. I'm going to use all of my openings to build a great analytics team. And so what I did is I put together a portfolio of super smart people. So I hired, yeah.
Why would you want to build that?
So the question was what I want to build at. So there's a couple of reasons. One is that the entire exec team are all engineers. And the common language with all the engineers is data. The common language is information, is analytics, it's proving concept. So I thought that was really important. Secondly, is that many other HR roles that I've had, the HR organization would constantly get berated for poor data. And they could never get the headcount right, they would say, or they could never get this information. The reporting structure was always off. And the credibility of HR never really flourished in some other companies I was at. And third is that for us to be able to build something powerful, data is really the focal point. If I want to build upon and scale, I need really strong data to do all the things I want to do for the company. So with that in mind, I made justification, and the CEO said, fine, go for it. So I hired an econ background, I hired a statistician, an actuary, I hired a mathematician, and I hired a geneticist. And I took an experiment on the geneticist, and the reason I hired the geneticist was I figured anybody who could do an experiment, stare at it, change a variable, stare at it again for a couple days would be great, right? Patience, and they could just constantly iterate on and also measure and put feedback into the process of what worked and what wouldn't work. So I put all these in a room, and I said, now you're going to be the entire HR organization, right? So for benefits, when I wanted to redesign benefits, I used the actuary to look at probabilities and help me within the insurance markets. I used the mathematician and statistician to help me with comp programs, look at benchmarking for comp and build a whole comp structure across the organization. I used the person with the econ background to help me with a lot of analysis for and dashboards for the different execs and the CEO. And before I knew it, create all these different analytics, and I could run the whole HR team for the next 2 years on these analytics, folks. So what I gave them an objective. We're going to create all these different analyses for the company. And the key is I want to create analyses for the organization before the CEO or the execs would ask me for it. This group had to be basically, they had to look into the future and forecast what are the needs of the company as the company grew, and we would create this whole portfolio of information that allowed the company to make good business decisions. The key is that the data had to be really good, so we had to make sure the data on the people was immaculate. So every week, they basically closed and they got everything updated. And I said, look, if the finance organization can close the books every quarter, we can close people data, every week, every month. So we constantly were doing audits to make sure that the data was right, so we could build all these great analyses. And I'll show you some examples. So the first one was, again, I'm thinking about scale, right? The first one was monitor org redundancy. So the concept here was, as a small company, the CEO or the execs would have a really good feel for how the company was growing. However, I was concerned that as we got big, as I saw that we're going to build a factory and we're going to have this whole sales organization that have thousands of people and grow globally, that just knowing it from the back of your mind, going from a few hundred people into the thousands, we need a basic analysis to show how the company is growing in a very healthy way. We didn't want bloat. We didn't want organizations to build similar-like organizations in different groups. So if one group had a data analyst organization, another group would have the same one. It's wasting headcount if they're both doing the same thing, right? It's wasting money. So we created this since we own the basically all the data. We're able to look across different organizations and really pinpoint what teams were building similar groups, and it showed up on our graph with similar organizational structures, and we're able to have a discussion and make a very informed decision. Should we continue to have two groups having the same function, or should we blend the two? And we do that constantly. We do a refresh every quarter to make sure that the organization was growing in a healthy way. And then we looked at basically span per manager, like how many direct reports a manager would have, what's the right amount. We look at the flatness of the organization, how many layers does it take to get to the CEO? Is there 12 layers or is it 8? Do we have a philosophy around that to keep it flat? People say we like flat organizations, but I made sure that we could measure it on an ongoing basis. And then we create dashboards for people, and for different execs. So we look at, again, how the org was designed based on levels of the organization, the pay position, and then we create these health checks that we'd have available every month and provide them with understanding of where people are financially. Employees are able to look at their pay position, what the performance scores were, and then just basically help this whole health check that the executive can make really good decisions on. This person could be a flight risk, this person needs to be promoted, ways to really engage the employees to help with the retention and help with growth. So I'll use the story of the factory. So in the factory, we set up these, like in the Apple stores, there were these Genius bars at the end of the store. Like you walk through and then you see this Genius bar, and that person's supposed to be able to answer a lot of questions for you. So we said, okay, we need a lot of touch points in the factory, because with 10,000 plus people working there, we have there's a lot of touch points we need for these factory workers to make sure that we're growing a healthy organization. We had union concerns on one side. We had just organizational scaling concerns. There were sometimes we had to add 1,200 people to open up a shift in like 6 weeks. They would give us like a short amount of time to build that shift. So we set up this answer bar. And the answer bar was staffed by really smart, capable HR folks who are cross-trained in different areas. And the biggest thing they would do is they would sit in high traffic areas. So in the cafe, during lunch, they'd be open and people could walk up. Basically, it's a big desk, like a walk-up information desk is that kind of concept. But it was highly, we measured it in a very efficient way. So I had two measurements that I asked the people to do at the desk to understand what was going on. One was the type of issue that was raised. So they would have people come up and say, look, I need to get benefits covered, or there's an issue with my payroll, my paycheck, I don't know what's going on. And we'd track that over time and see every week, we'd see if there's trends in the work environment about certain issues that are popping up. We'd also track the grumpiness level of the person who's coming up. So we'd say, all right, is this person happy or the person super grumpy, right? It was pretty binary. And then we'd correlate, all right, here's the issues, and then here's the grumpiness level. And then we looked across the board and said, we realized that that there was trends where if we saw that there was a rising sense of grumpiness or frustration in a certain part of the organization, or a certain shop, or a certain part of the business, we could track it, and we also could correlate it to the type of issues that occurred. So end of that week, when I see the trend starting to come up, because we'd have hundreds of people coming every day, then we're able to then basically parachute into that group with the HR team and solve an issue. So, and that was really useful for us to get on a daily basis good information, and on a weekly basis we're able to make corrections. So it's like we don't have to wait for the annual survey, or we don't have to wait for a pulse survey that comes out, annual survey every year, pulse survey every quarter. It was basically daily data that was being fed into this machine that we can then make really great decisions on to help the company grow in a healthy way. Yeah. So it was constant. So I didn't wait for a big surprise. If I saw a trend happening, we'd fix it. That's kind of the concept. Right. Questions?
Quick question.
Yeah.
So obviously Tesla is an extraordinary, Elon has a reputation for being an extraordinarily driven CEO, the culture for being a very driven culture. So when you're hiring folks in the engineering department, inside even the manufacturing and production department, how do you rub off the shininess of working at Tesla, the cool company, and in the hiring process, get across that this is the hardest thing you've ever done, right? You're joining the Marines, not the Air Force. How do you because the Marines have that shiny factor too, right? But at the end of the day, it's cold and miserable, and you're going to be in the mud. How do you do those two things and make sure that people get what it really means to be inside an organization, changing how people move?
Yeah. So we did several things, and I'll just kind of go through a couple. Hopefully that will address your question. One is that we really honed in on how to filter people coming in, and there's all these different tests you can do, and I'm going to start with like engineers, but basically generically we look at two things. Actually ask the employee or the candidate to turn in their answer to two questions. The first is, tell us about your progression from one job to another and why you made the change, and was there intentionality to it, so you had to think that through. The second was, tell us why you're exceptional. And that question, we phrased it so that, we want to know if the person saw a very difficult situation and they persevered through it. Do they have the grit? Do they have the stamina to handle this type of stuff? So we'd ask them for a very tough situation where they had to overcome that situation. If they saw, the business was coming crashing to an end, but they were the ones who jumped in to figure out how to turn it around, or whatever the situation was. So we filtered those two out. So that way, when candidates coming in, if they couldn't answer that in a very good articulate way, then we would actually pass on them. If they couldn't come up with a great story about them being involved in some very horrendous situation where they had to persevere. Secondly, we did set up a lot of filtering processes we tested out engineers. We had panel discussions where they brought in and they presented on their topics, and they got debated. So we simulated the environment of a normal, healthy debate on any technical topic, and see how they could withstand it, or how they jumped into that type of environment. And then we just told them it's going to be a tough environment. I mean, it's going to be rough. I mean, you're going to, it's not a 9-to-5 gig. You're going to be working a lot of hours. You're going to give up a lot. So we set expectations. So we set expectation, we tested for it, and we found it filtered out a lot of people along the way. We even did that for the manufacturing folks. We had the same type of questions as well as a whole process, and we would get a 17% pass-through rate. So for every 100 people, only 17 people came in just for the factory job. But we then filtered out. So when they asked me the question, when they asked me to put together a plan to get 1,200 people in 6 weeks, we had to.
Do the math. You had to get 10,000.
Yeah, we had to get 6,000 to 10,000 candidates to come in within those, and we just rented out a hotel room, a whole hotel floor, and just had this gigantic process to get them through, knowing that only 17% would come through the process because we measured really well. But the worst for us was for people to drop out once we got through. So we tried to make it as realistic as possible and tell them, this is going to be, it's going to be tough, and do you have the stamina for it? And that usually chased away a lot of people. Yeah.
Earlier today, we had a panel with a few of our CEOs who had a very successful exit. One of them was talking about his involvement, hands-on involvement with hiring process.
Yep.
In order to retain culture, in order to retain consistency as far as who you bring on board and so on. And obviously, hiring for scale. Tesla obviously is a hyper scale. How did Elon get involved personally, and to what extent can you make this effective as you scale so quickly, including the CEO wanting to stay involved and simply not?
Yeah. So I guess I was lucky enough that I came from two environments that the CEO wanted to be involved. So Larry was very involved in Google all the way through my tenure there, and Elon was very, very involved. So at the beginning, I'll use at Tesla. At the beginning, the CEO would interview every single candidate, from the front desk receptionist to the VP of a group. So it was a constant every week. Said, I'll take 5 minutes, I'll take 10 minutes, but I want to dig into this person's background and feel comfortable that the person was really good. And for the first few years, that persisted. I told him my job was to make it so that he was so overwhelmed with the candidates that he couldn't, he was just being saturated. He says, I would love that day when that happens, right? So now even after he couldn't interview everybody, he still wanted to be very involved. So those two questions I just mentioned about looking at their backgrounds, and person has to articulate why they went from job to job in their transition, and also something they overcame, what makes them exceptional. We turned that into questions they actually had to write up for themselves, and we sent those questions to the candidate, and then we modified or we summarized those answers or verbatim, but summarized the packet, and we sent them up to Elon for his review. So we emailed him even candidates that he couldn't talk to personally, and we give him a profile of that person plus their answer to the two questions. And then he could opt in, like, I'm not satisfied with these questions, so I'm going to call them. So as we scaled, that allowed us to go from him talking to everybody to him doing selective talking. And then when we were doing thousands of factory workers, we created giant spreadsheets with every single candidate, their background, in these giant spreadsheets, and he would review the spreadsheets, and he'd pick out 5 people that he says, these people don't look good, I want to talk to these 2 people. So he never stopped that process. Even today, he is intimately involved in the recruiting process. Yeah? All right, other questions? Okay. All right, scrappy recruiting. So I thought I'd go a little bit about some secret sauce behind the recruiting function. We touched a little bit upon it. Please, these questions are great, and we covered some of the stuff that was already in here. All right, so hire an in-house recruiting team, super key. So I can't stress enough how having your own recruiter in your own organization who knows the culture, knows the operations, is imperative. I made a pledge that at Tesla I would never ever use an outside agency. So I built a leadership recruiting team. I built a manufacturing recruiting team over time. Again, it started scrappy, so I started with two recruiters. But as we grew, I brought everything in-house so that the company didn't have to pay for it, and also we have a better quality and better candidate experience. In 1 year, we hired probably 100 executive roles, from senior manager all the way to VP. And if we did 100 outside in the environment, that would have been cost prohibitive. So I'm glad we had a team internally to do that. We launched a recruiting program in 1 week. So I mentioned that. So at Monday, a good thing, we started with the interns. A little bit of a story here. I got a call and said, look, I hated the interns we've had in the past. They've always been relatives of someone who works here, and I hate that. So I need you to come up with 5 amazing engineers by Friday. So if you know recruiting, then you can deliver. And it's Monday afternoon, and I said, oh boy, all right. So I had to get 5 amazing engineers by Friday. So I brought the small recruiting team together, and a long story short, we basically said, okay, we're going to get some engineers from universities for internships. We looked on to Wikipedia, looked at all the Formula SAE championship teams across the United States who won competitions. They list the people who are the best engineers and the winning team. I said, all right, gather all those engineers that were on these teams for the last 2 years, and what we'll do is we're going to reach out to all these people and see who's available. The recruiters reached out. They found about 50 of those engineers were ready for their next gig. We culled it down into a group of about 20 people. We had the engineers do technical phone screens by Wednesday. By Thursday, we had selected 5 or 7 of them, and by Friday, I rolled up 5 amazing engineers up to get reviewed. So it's totally possible that within 1 week, you can go from nothing and actually build a program. And so that was asked to be done. So you can be scrappy and just get it done. So leverage that you're a small company. That was a big plus for us when we did a lot of calls for people, that we said they were very nimble. That's how we compete against the bigger companies like Google and Apple, saying like you're not going to be lost in the mix, and that was a really big ploy for us. Creating a culture of recruiting is super important. So everyone was a recruiter in the company. Everyone was responsible for bringing talent from referrals, responsible for making recommendations, making improvements to the process. And here's one thing we did at Tesla that I thought was really interesting and that I never experienced before in other companies. So what I did experience before is like when I was sitting down at Google, even Google, for example, and they asked like, how come you haven't delivered this Gmail, for example, or whatever this product line was? They said, well, recruiting didn't give us the engineers. And we were always the ones who were being pounded on by the exec and also by the leadership. And it was not good. I mean, it was just the dynamic. So at Tesla, it was different, and I really appreciated this, that that was never an excuse. So we actually said up front, you can never have recruiting as an excuse for not delivering anything. If you don't have enough people, that means that your engineers or your organization or you personally as a manager have not figured out how to leverage the HR team, or haven't gone and recruited yourself, or gone to out to places to kind of hit the pavement. Your number one priority is to hire people and find people. So the big thing was that that was not an excuse. You just really pounded out to the managers that was your responsibility to hire no matter what, and you need to be better at this. And we said, if you cannot figure out how to do it, we'll take you out of your role and we'll find a manager who will do a better job to build a team. Every time we went to a new location, we leveraged the PR. Again, Tesla is a small company. No one knew about the company across the United States. So when we were recruiting in the East Coast, for example, they said, "What's the name of the company? Tulsa?" So no one knew about it. So there was no brand recognition at all in the early days. The recruiters had to muscle it in. The only way I could do that when we went into the East Coast, for example, is I asked the PR team, "All right, so send out press releases. We're going to recruit out in these small towns or this city. So as many press releases or many times you can get the name in the public eye, let's do that." So they would, 2 months ahead of time, they would send lots of press releases out. They would send, we sent a car out. They'd drive around, get a little publicity. So that way, the first time we contact a person, it actually was the second time they saw about the company. "Oh yeah, I saw something in the news about you," and it helped to kind of grease the way for us, the recruiters, to do a good job. So a little bit of name recognition, and then it went a long way. We talked about staying involved in the recruiting process. The CEOs did that all the way through. So as leaders of the company, I would recommend the same thing. And make the recruiting process smooth and memorable. Many times you've had individuals who would talk about the really bad experience they've had at a company and going in and interviewing at a company. So we try to make the recruiting process really positive, memorable. We would give swag, we'd do other things, we'd have people meet with them, so we made it a really memorable experience. And then regardless, I think I was really frustrated with Google at this, continuously feed your talent pipeline. There was a time in Google's history that as they were forecasting that maybe the business would go down a little bit, that they let go a percent of the recruiting workforce. I don't know why they did that, but they just decided to do that as a company. And it never made sense to me because if I looked at the forecast and what's coming up, you always need this constant machine to generate great candidates and looking at the noble universe, I call it, all the different networks out there to constantly build your database. So at the one thing that I mentioned at Tesla, I said, look, we're never going to get rid of the talent organization at all. I mean, during times of that things are a little bit more tight, that's the time you want to upgrade your talent. That's the only time you want to build a great network. You want to build your portfolio of great people. And so we always kept that going. Diversity inclusion starts day one, right? It's important that you have that mindset. We can talk more about that later on. And then set up recruiting analytics. I want to go in a little bit more detail, if that's okay.
Hey, Arnnon?
Yeah, please.
For some of the people, so varying sizes of the employee base within some of the companies that we have represented here, and there's a lot going on. There's a lot of different tactical things to do. Are there one or two that you would say, hey, as a starting point, this is what you should do, like first and second, that to help them get on the way to developing all of these things?
Yeah. So the big thing is that the culture of recruiting, make sure everyone's a recruiter within the company and everyone brings in talent. At the beginning, 42% of the hires at Google were based on referrals. So it was a huge push originally. And then a big percentage of the Tesla hires also were referrals as well. You know, good people, right? So I'd say get that whole culture of recruiting, the referral program set up. And then the...
Is that with some comp, with some bonus that comes along with it? If you bring a friend, you get like $2,500 or whatever?
Yeah, there's actually a debate about that, but yes, we eventually put a bonus onto the referral program, but the concept was like, if you believe in a great company and you believe you want to help the company and build value, long-term value, then why should we pay you to bring great people on board, right? So I had a debate, although we ended up doing some type of bonus, there was still that underlying theme like you should just want to grow the company and bring your friends on board for free, but we did a little incentive just to help that out. Yeah.
I may have misunderstood you, but I thought what I heard was even in the event when like the need for bringing on more people has slowed, that there would never be a reduction in staff for the recruiting function. Did I understand?
Well, what I meant is that so what I found is, when I was at Applied Materials, the first time that the company slowed down, they just terminated the entire recruiting function, just took it all away, and then said it's cyclical, and when we go up again, we'll hire it again. Google did that a little bit. There was a little bit of a downturn, and the first group they did was they just knocked out, 150 recruiters, right? So what I'm saying is that even during times that are tight, is sometimes where you want to, you want to have still a strong recruiting function that's going to find you great talent, that's going to upgrade roles internally, even though you're not going to grow, and still build a portfolio, build a database of great people. So I'm just a big advocate of just keeping a talent function intact and not be the thing that gets first chopped when the company is a little bit cash strapped.
Can you expand a little bit, like if those folks aren't doing direct recruiting? I mean, you said like upgrade and build a network, but like what specifically would you task your team of recruiters with if it wasn't like filling roles?
Well, it kind of goes back. It's a great question. So yeah, they can't be dead weight for sure, right? To your point. So because I hired a lot of great people, they helped in other parts of the organization. So so at any one time, even at Tesla, although there was a lot of recruiting, for example, I repositioned some of the recruiters if I needed to. They'd go on the floor and they'd help with the production line. They'd help with, there was a time where we had to open up boxes and do inventory. And I said, okay, for the rest of this quarter, you guys are going to do inventory control and you're going to help out and you're going to pop back in. They'll help with sales. They'll jump over and help with sales for a little bit. So it wasn't like there's dead weight, but I didn't want to lose that talent and that continuity of this people who really understood it and evangelized the company and brought great talent on board. But because it's a startup, and I started with a philosophy that you're going to do stuff outside your scope all the time, I was able to pivot these people to other parts of the organization that helped. And because they're good people, it wasn't like a charity case. It really was. These people made a difference and an impact in other parts of the organization. Sometimes they stayed there. They never came back. Or they were asked to take lead onto a team or stay there permanently. And it was fine, because I'm happy to see the organization with great people. But well utilized. So yeah, so don't misinterpret my original comment, yeah. All right, yeah, please.
Yeah, so you mentioned this earlier. How do you convince like an engineer or paralegal to want to do recruiting in HR?
Well, so there's a couple ways that I kind of approached it. One was that I said, you will be planted into that team in a year, but your job is to hire 10 people, but you have a secure role. But before you actually go into that organization, you're going to hire the next 10 people, right? So that was one way I would do it. The other is that I sought out people and I convinced them. I just said, look, why don't you take a year pivot from your legal job, either early on in the career, and try this. And I was a good convincer, and I just had people who gave it a shot and came on board and did it. And they stayed in recruiting. Like I had a person who especially came from sales, for example. He's still been recruiting 20 years later. And the people who were paralegals and so forth, they never took the job in the actual functional area because they loved the recruiting so much that they stayed in that role. But it was convincing people, and it was tough. It wasn't easy, but we did it. Yeah. Okay, just a few graphics, and we'll continue with some questions. So one of these important for the analytics team to measure was the source of hire, right? So I really need to understand where good candidates sourcing took place, like who was a really good fit for the company long term. And I created, this is really important, I created the recruiters' incentives, not based only on fills or based on recs filled, but on if the person was here for 2 years after they were hired. So I had this two-part incentive where we help recruiters to make sure that they got their numbers. But I also looked back and said, all right, what recruiters produce the best quality candidates over time, based on performance ratings, based on who terminated, and I had that feedback loop back to the recruiter so they understood exactly how well they did on a long-term basis, and I rewarded those people who not only filled their jobs but also had great employees over time. Second was I thought it was really interesting. I had the analytics team look at market conditions and see how that impacted the incoming resume flow. So we looked at, in this case, this is post-public, so after like stock price, for example, this is an example of it. And then if there was a press release or there was some tweet that went out or something happened in the environment, we measured the amount of resumes that would come into to the company. So then we could simulate, if we knew that we were going to go on a hiring blitz like in 6 months, I knew some of the factors and we could predict if certain types of press releases went out, certain type of tweets went out, certain events, I could predict the quantity and volume of resume that would come in. And it allowed us to see the market first, so it allowed us to get the quantity that we needed to do conversion rates into hires. And next thing is an example. So kind of behind this, this graph actually is the Bay Area. So somehow it got bleeded out a little bit. But
Smoke problem.
yeah, the smoke, yeah, the recent smoke, yeah. So the concept here is that I kept close tabs on, this is an example, close tabs on where do employees exist throughout the Bay Area, and kind of plotted that out for a couple things. One is that I used it for recruiting events. So if I knew there was a bunch of employees that lived in a concentrated area, they could help in that area to do recruiting events and go out. And again, everyone's a recruiter, they would help. Second is that we actually created a lot of programs that would use this data. So one was a shuttle program, for example. You know how some companies build shuttle programs or go outsource it. We decided to do it ourselves, our own internal shuttle program. And we wanted to be, so we had, it wasn't electric at the time, but we went to the junkyard and got 4 buses, and then we converted them into natural oil, like French fry oil, and converted them. And then we had employees. We had employees who gave them incentive that they could be the drivers. So we tested them. They became the drivers of the shuttles. And so you had these French fry, kind of carts going around. People would pile in, and they park at their house, and then they go and drive around to pick everybody up, and then drop everybody off again. But we had a homegrown shuttle program for a long time, and it was based on really good data and also us just being super scrappy about that. Yeah.
What's been your philosophy as far as work from home, especially for people who are remote a little bit? And I'm curious about the culture in terms of allowing people to extensively work remotely or not.
Yeah. So again, the answer is it depends a little bit. Overall, there's a time and place for remote working for sure. I had a little bit of a dilemma at Tesla that kind of prevented me from actually creating that work environment because you have 10,000 factory workers that couldn't do that, right? And that they had to be there for their shift, be on the line. If they were absent the line, it actually injure the production flow. So I had to create also a culture of fairness. So if one group got this benefit, the other group should get it too. So I had to basically look across the groups and say, well, this is not going to fit for everybody, so I'm probably not going to be able to do it. Because then otherwise, we have 10,000 factory workers saying this is unfair, and why are these people getting benefits that we don't get? And then it creates a whole other set of problems that I have to deal with. So overall, I think there's a place for it, depending on your role. But at Tesla, I excluded it as probably a non-starter because the fair environment was too strong. Yeah. Okay.
Did you look at attrition by geography and how far away it was?
Yeah.
Commuting and stuff?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. We put together a predictive model that looked at how likely a person was to leave the company and what were the factors. And we had this algorithm that we set up. So we plugged it in. So one was commuting distance, how far away from the job, how long they've been with the company, how many promotions they've had. We looked at all these different variables and put them into this algorithm. But that was one of the main drivers for attrition. We found, length of commute was something that was impactful for people's longevity of the company. Okay, and also funnel. For any good CEO, you need to get great pipeline reports. So we would have the candidate flow. Remember, I talked about even the production side. We have a 17% pass-through rate for candidates. So we'd make this setup. So again, all this was available to the CEO. So I guess the point about this is that this is a portfolio of data that the leaders would have at their fingertips to be able to make really good decisions on the business. And this was proactively created. I mean, we didn't wait for this to be asked for. We just built these models so that we could provide the data to the organization and help us do our job better. So we provide this on an ongoing basis. All right, so we talked about the three areas of focus. Again, how it's structured in terms of reporting to the CEO, the DNA of the team. I gave some examples around that. And also the functional areas where recruiting and analytics were the first two functional areas that were built within the company, and it provided all this downstream data and capability for the HR team that allowed us to scale the company in a very effective way. Okay. All right, so that's the main part of the presentation. Let's open up for more questions, and we can debate some stuff and talk through things. What do you guys want to talk about? Please.
So thank you. I like the presentation. It's helpful. The amount of data to collect here is hard because they're in different transactional systems, or they're in people's heads, or they're in different. Is there a tool that you used, or did you create tools unique for the amount of data? For instance, the health checks and so forth.
Yeah, that's a good point. So at the beginning, when there was no money for tools, the HR team had one just basically HR system that captured stuff, and it was called ADP, kind of a famous, but it was, yeah, it's like a payroll thing. It wasn't built for any of this information. So I said, okay, we're gonna have to be super scrappy about this because we're not gonna be able to get the tools. We don't have the funding for it. We don't have anything, but we have to be creative. So the one thing I made sure is that in that system itself, the data was 100%. So I said, look, let's just audit all the data. Let's look at all the people information, and let's make sure on 55 variables or 55 elements about the person that we want to measure or we want to track, that we make sure it's 100% on the entire company. So their address, right, their job title, all the different components about them, and make sure there's 100% in there. So at least for that system, we made sure the accuracy was right. And then we just use Excel at the beginning and did all the reports in Excel. And then continue as we got a little bit bigger and able more fun, we were able to get more products that provided it. But the logic was still the same. I mean, we were still able to. I just had smart people that just took Excel spreadsheets and did some magical around it. So it wasn't like a miracle product line. It just took a little bit of muscling to get the information right the first time. Once it was right, then we were able to put it into Excel and to kind of work on it. All right, other questions? Please.
Sorry, I've got curious on two of them here, comp and training. On the comp side, any thoughts about golden standards for equity grants and for later stage companies? Obviously, each one is very, very different. But specifically insofar as what happens towards the end of the vesting period you showed here, you do a piece of it. You can't give all, you have to pick a few. Any
right.
thoughts and how you address it on the training side? Just thoughts about, there's a lot of different groups and each one has a lot of different knowledge requirements for it. To what extent HR was capable to really spearhead that process across the company, and what tools have you implemented in order to support training?
Okay. I'll start with training first, and then I'll go into comp. So the training one is, when we first started, we basically prioritized how we wanted to train the organization. And we felt that and also the culture was that you kind of learned on the job. So there wasn't a lot of like in-class training, or we couldn't do, and especially scaling, it would be too much. But we did prioritize, and we decided that we're going to focus on the factory and make sure that we're bringing so many thousands of people in from different industries into manufacturing that HR will drive the creation of kind of certification courses. And we just need to find really great people to do that. So we built a training organization that focused only on manufacturing at the beginning to build strength, how to be good we used some of the software skills of how to be a good manager, but also the certification courses, we organized that to allow growth of that training function. The second is that we built one then for sales to make people better salespeople, and that's pretty much it. So and then we offered some generic courses, but the concept was that we wanted to only focus training time and training dollars on the biggest impact for the company and what would actually drive revenue or create better production processes. And so we just focused on that. And then everybody else, you can either take one of those courses and one of the generic courses, or you're on your own, and we create some online capability, but we didn't really push it that much. So that was really important for us to do that way. On the comp side, Yeah, we did. There was a lot of iterations. Every company is a little bit different on that. So a lot of iterations around as people matured and maybe their initial grant vested over time and they became less and less. We we use a couple factors. We said, okay, we probably only going to give refresher grants to those people who are high performing. So we intentionally did not use all of grants for people who are average performers. To bolster the concept that it's a merit-based organization. And then we did create a model based on the size of the company, based on the shares outstanding, and looked at the whole thing to kind of come up with an amount that we would give for promotion and give for recognition.
Was your feeling that it was an ad hoc model that applied to your specific company? Or are there any standards that you have felt out there that would have applied across for companies? Certain elements of that question.
Yeah.
Not the exactness of what it
Yeah. Well, there actually, I mean, there's a lot of, we benchmarked. So we did benchmark, and there is, and I can actually, after this, I can, follow up on that. But there's a benchmark. There's a company that provides in the Bay Area. I'm not going to tout the company, but but they look at pre-IPO companies, and they give you an example of for each position and level, what is expected of what that person should hold over time.
I know that. It was more a question about refreshing, like you had mentioned.
Yeah.
Some practices, and at the end of the day, you got to make a choice. Put aside a position, A, B, or C is going to get X or Y. It's more the standard conduct across every company.
Yeah. We'll talk about it afterwards. Good. Yeah, thank you.
I think that's a good segue, actually. We'll have a quick bio break right now.
Okay.
And if you guys want to catch up further with Arnnon,
Not in the bathroom.
feel free to do.
Yeah. I'll see you out here. Yeah, I'll see you out here.
Not there, but.
All right. Well, thanks for your time. I appreciate it. Hopefully it was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.